The German panzers rapidly advanced toward the English Channel. On May 20th, 1940, German regiments reached the Channel at the mouth of the River Somme. The Northern Allied forces were completely cut off from the rest of France. The panzers now turned north to the French ports of Boulogne and Calais. On May 25th, Boulogne fell to the Germans. Calais, held by French troops and a hastily gathered force from Britain, surrendered 2 days later. In the north, the German Army Group B continued to pressure the withdrawing Allied forces, now surrounded on 3 sides. The Allies became trapped in a pocket centered on the port of Dunkirk. On May 25th, Belgians who were fighting on the left of the British warned that they could not fight for much longer under the unrelenting German pressure. Commander of the British forces, Lord Gort, was tightly hemmed in by the Germans. He realized that if the Belgians surrendered, his left flank would be exposed and his expeditionary force would be destroyed. He now decided to save his army. He asked London to organize an evacuation by sea back to Britain. On the German side, Gerd von Rundstedt, the commander of Army Group A, had already decided to temporarily halt his panzers outside Dunkirk. After a 2-week rampage across northern France, their crews were exhausted. Vehicles and equipment needed to be repaired, and their supply lines were overextended. Hermann Goering was conscious of the relatively minor contribution his Luftwaffe had made so far. He saw von Rundstedt's pause as his perfect opportunity. Goering believed that his Luftwaffe could claim a spectacular victory by bombing the Allied pocket at Dunkirk. He asked Hitler to give them the chance. On May 25th, Hitler decided to stop von Rundstedt's panzers and assign the destruction of the Allied forces at Dunkirk to Goering's Luftwaffe. This proved to be a grave blunder, one that Hitler would have every reason to regret throughout the war. Hermann Goering wasted no time and ordered his Luftwaffe to attack the Allies trapped in the Dunkirk pocket. The German infantry and artillery maintained pressure on the ground. On May 26, 1940, the day after the British forces asked for help, the man in charge of the British naval base at Dover, Admiral Bertram Ramsay, began evacuating the British Expeditionary Force from Dunkirk. The mission was codenamed Operation Dynamo, but expectations were that it would probably rescue no more than a small proportion of the trapped troops. On May 27th, Belgium's King Leopold surrendered to Germany to prevent any more suffering in his country. This increased the pressure on the beleaguered British at Dunkirk and on Operation Dynamo. As the Luftwaffe began attacking rescue ships crossing the Channel, Goering told Hitler, "Only fishing boats are coming across. I hope the Tommies can swim well." The Luftwaffe sank a number of ships. The Dunkirk pocket was closing. But despite pressure from the Germans, over 26,000 British troops were evacuated by May 29th. And during the next 24 hours, more than 47,000 were rescued. 54,000 more were evacuated on the 30th. Even so, Hitler was satisfied he had totally defeated the Allied forces in the north. He now turned his attention to conquering the remainder of France and was planning a new thrust south across the rivers Somme and Aisne. Yet the evacuation of Dunkirk continued. Now paddle steamers and pleasure boats were being pressed into service. These became known as the Little Ships of Dunkirk. They played an important role in the rescue mission. Not just British, but now French and Belgian troops were being evacuated from the beaches. One reason for that success was that Royal Air Force fighters had begun engaging the Luftwaffe over the beaches. They were only a small part of the total British fighter force. The majority of the RAF was standing by to defend Britain in case the French were defeated.
Just inside Dunkirk, headed for the sea.
Even so, the British fighters helped limit the Luftwaffe's onslaught. The Luftwaffe could not halt the evacuation, and Goering's attempt at military glory was frustrated. On May 31st, 56,000 troops were rescued, and another 65,000 on the following day. But the mounting losses of ships finally forced Britain's Admiral Ramsay to restrict the evacuation to nighttime. Meanwhile, German pressure on the shrinking Dunkirk perimeter was remorseless. Time was running out for Operation Dynamo. June 3rd would be the final night of the evacuation. Nearly 30,000 men were rescued. The next day, the Germans entered the port of Dunkirk. They took 50,000 Allied troops prisoner. They surveyed the wrecked guns and heavy equipment the Allies had been forced to leave behind. The Germans had destroyed 177 Allied aircraft and sunk some 200 ships. Hitler appeared ready to become the master of Western Europe. On June 6, 1940, Hitler's armies turned south from Dunkirk and began assaulting the rest of France. Once they crossed the rivers Somme and Aisne, the panzers resumed their rampage. On June 14th, German troops entered Paris. The French had declared Paris an open city to prevent the destruction suffered by Warsaw in September 1939. 8 days later, France signed an armistice with Germany. Aboard the same railroad car, Germany had signed its 1918 armistice with the Allies. A triumphant Hitler now believed Europe lay at his feet. He had forgotten that he allowed so many Allied troops to escape from Dunkirk. On the other side of the English Channel, Britain remained defiant. "220,000 British and 120,000 French and Belgian troops had been successfully evacuated from Dunkirk. Many of the French troops returned to defend their country, but were unable to prevent the defeat of France. In Britain, survivors of the British Expeditionary Force were greeted as heroes. The miracle of Dunkirk was seen as a victory. It meant the British Army remained virtually intact. The British were now determined to continue fighting until they defeated the Nazis. Hitler's blunder was in assigning the destruction of the Allied forces at Dunkirk to Goering and his Luftwaffe, instead of allowing his panzers to complete the mission. This had far-reaching consequences.